Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to a special episode of Governance, Corruption, and Justice. I'm your hostess this evening, senior journalist of Kaieteur News, Kiana Wilburg, and we have with us someone who's no stranger to our panel, Ms. Dr. Vincent Adams, the former head of the Environmental Protection Agency. Sir, welcome to tonight's program, and thank you for being here.
Glad to be back. Hopefully it's not the last.
No, definitely not. So I'm going to jump right into our discussion this evening because we're going to keep it short and sweet.
Sure.
You were recently relieved of your duties as head of the Environmental Protection Agency, but months before this occurred, you were part of a special team that was tasked with reviewing the Payara Field Development Plan. Now, for those of you who are listening, if you're not aware of what that is, Payara is the third project that's being developed in the Stabroek block by ExxonMobil and its partners, Hess Corporation and CNOOC Nexen. Now, the Payara development plan had to undergo some rigorous reviews, and you were part of that team. Could you share with us what were your observations during that review process,
Sure.
and what were your contributions?
Well, again, thanks for being here, for inviting me. The Payara was the very first project. Of course, you had Lisa 1, Lisa 2.
Lisa
So
2,
this year was
yes.
my very first opportunity to be involved in the full life cycle review and looking at everything else. Because
Okay.
when I came, when all of the reviews and the EIAs and stuff, it was even finished for Payara too. So here was my first opportunity to be involved in my first FDP.
Okay.
So this year was a great opportunity. We had a really good team. I worked very closely throughout the time that I've been here with Dr. Bino. So we had a combined team from the Department of Energy and, of course, from the EPA. It so happened that I had some special expertise that was needed on the team. My background, of course, in petroleum engineering. And of course in environmental engineering.
Yes.
So I think the EPA played a great part in the input into the review of that plan. Of course it was right before coming to the end of it that I was removed. I think throughout the process we had some major issues. I was kind of leading the charge, so to speak, on some very key issues. So I guess it was kind of disappointing to not see it through, but that was a decision that was made, and so I did not stay until the end. I got close, but not. I was not there at the end to see what the final product was.
Were you surprised that you were removed during such a critical time?
Sure, I was. I think anybody will be surprised. Here, I'm, and I don't think that there is any debate about it. That I was the expert petroleum engineer on the team, and the expert environmental engineer on the team. So here you've got a person, and take my name out of it it's not about Vincent Adams. It's, if you just look at the makeup of the team, and you've got an individual with this capability who is heading, who understands and who could match expertise with the other side, meaning ExxonMobil and their subsidiaries. And that person who's leading the discussions, and then when you really get down to coming to the end of it, that person is removed. I think anybody would be surprised.
What were the key issues during that process for you?
Well, there were several, and the two that the EPA was really leading, and well, there were several that we were leading, but the two that stood out, of course, flaring. As you know, flaring has been a major issue based on our experience with with Lisa One
Yes.
production because there were some things, some expectations that were written into the Lisa One permit. For example, there will be no flaring, basically from day one. That didn't happen. You know, we were still flaring. I don't know what it is now, but we're still flaring. So we've learned, and you know, when you look at how the permit was written, you know, there it could use some tightening up. And as you recall, I've mentioned here several times that we were going ahead and revising the Lisa One permit. You know, I don't know what happened to that, but until I left the EPA, that was something that we were in the process of doing. So that was one of the things that we were standing by. And I don't think that we were asking for anything that was extraordinary. We were saying, and which has always been my standard. I told the head of EEPGL, Exxon, and every company that comes in, especially foreign internationals, the one thing that I've asked of them, which is not unreasonable, they've told me it's not unreasonable, is that our standard is that we expect you to abide by a minimum of, well, at least what you have got to abide with in other countries, especially the United States of America, which is what I'm very familiar with because that's where I spent most of my career. So I understand the regulations. And I don't think any of them ever took exception to that. Of course, I said if you can make a case that you cannot, for whatever practical reason, you cannot meet those minimum expectations that you've got to abide with in those countries, then show us. And we'll be willing to consider.
And that's the minimum expectation for flaring.
Absolutely. We said, one of the things we said, okay, you're going to have to follow the standards that are set by the United States government. Because I said there's a particular reason. It takes a lot of work to develop these standards, research, and we do not have the capacity to go reinvent the wheel. We someday, we probably gonna go try to develop our own standard, but it doesn't make any sense. Even the United States adopt other countries, standards that they've developed because it takes a lot of work, and as long as you know the basis of it and it could be justified, that's what you use. You don't need to reinvent the wheel. So when I hear people say, well, we don't have standards, it's not that we don't have standards, is how do we, adopt those standards? So that's what all I was asking. Well, okay, these standards exist. Why not use these standards? Exxon and all of the companies throughout the world have accepted, if they operate in the United States of America, these are the standards that they're living with.
So there was
on
resistance.
The same conditions, absolutely. So why can't they use the same standards when they come to countries such as Guyana? It's a very simple question. I think it's more than reasonable to ask for that.
Do you think the resistance was a demonstration of the respect that the company has for Guyana's expectations of how it should operate in the environment?
Well, the bottom line is the companies are going to look out for their interest. And they're going to push it as far. This is not a criticism of them. This is just not, remember what's
that's just their
interest
behavior.
is the bottom line.
Yes.
And whatever they're allowed to do, as long as we push back and it's reasonable, trust me, they're going to adjust and they're going to accept it. But if we do not push back, guess what? They're going to push it as far as they can get, and then we're going to be the ones that are going to be buckling under. So that was a key position that that EPA, when I was there as part of the team, that we were holding on to,
Okay. So apart from the resistance to the...
Oh, the other one, you asked
Yes.
me for the two.
Yes.
The other major one was dumping of produced water.
Now, what is
In the
that?
ocean.
Just explain that for
Well, when
listeners.
you produce oil, from oil reservoirs, when you produce oil, you produce a lot of water also.
Okay.
As a matter of fact,
So there's water that comes up
and the
with
water
the oil
is,
as well.
you talk about really high brine content, like in some reservoirs, the brine could be several times the salination, the salinity of seawater, etc. It's
Okay.
really salt, and it has all kinds of minerals in it because you remember there's all sorts of minerals. So we do not really know what, and it's hot because it's coming from very very deep. As a matter of fact, it shows that it increases the temperature close to the FPSO by like 38 degrees or so centigrade. So
Wow.
I mean that's hot. So you can't tell me that that's not going to impact the environment because I've seen statement to that effect. Well, not only that, the standard, and the World Bank has set a standard, which is what I think EPGL was hanging their hats on. But the World Bank says the first option has to be reinjection, which is normal. I worked in the oil field, as a field engineer, production engineer, reservoir engineer, and every drop of water had to be reinjected back into the reservoir. Um, in this case, you're producing the water, but you want to dump it into the ocean because you got a wide open ocean, and then you want to use the sea water to inject into the reservoir to keep the pressure up. So
And that works out cheaper.
absolutely, without question. And you can't tell me that, well, this is going to cost more, which is what I'm saying here is what I told him. I said, so you're telling me that the health, safety, and the environment of the people of Guyana is not worth this $300 million that you've got to invest. So that was another major.
So in order to put the technology and what's not the infrastructure in place to re-inject,
That's right.
it would cost them 300 million, and they were
that was the
against
numbers
it.
that they were, yes, that was the number that I can recall.
Okay. Now, what were your contributions in terms of these matters were highlighted to everyone that was
Yes.
present?
Yes.
And there was obviously resistance from ExxonMobil.
Yes.
Now, what was the disposition of the other members on the team?
No, we were, and I can tell you this, we were all in sync. I think everybody, we had a very close knit team. I think everybody understood. Of course, until I was there. So I don't think there was any issue in terms of us agreeing on our side. But I really hadn't digested or I've seen comments on the final product, but I hadn't really gotten into it and studied it to see even what the final product is. But what I do know, it was changed into something final, not what at least I
Yes.
was. And when it was signed by the right authority, etc. But all I'm giving you is what my input was.
And just to add, I'd just like to make an interjection there, Dr. Adams. The recommendation that was made by the EPA for the relevant technology and infrastructure to be put in place for the reinjection of the produced water, the final product does not have any such requirement. Do you believe that Guyana's failure to ensure that that is done reflects some error in judgment? Do you think it's an error?
Well, in my opinion, it is an error, and
Okay.
I would always maintain that.
That we should have forced technology to re-inject for Payara.
Absolutely, yeah. Look, and there's always a balance, and I've mentioned this on this program and every place. I'm not just an extreme environmentalist. There's always have to be that balance between risk, environmental health and safety risk,
Yes.
versus economics. But you cannot, and which get into production and all. You can never be 100%. You eliminate 100% of the risk there. But what's the probability of? Because remember what risk is. Risk is basically the probability of occurrence multiplied by the consequence. Okay? Now the probability of occurrence may be very low, but the consequence could be very high. Look what happened at you don't get these major spills often, right? So, which means that the probability of occurrence is, guess what? Very, very low. But when you multiply a very low probability of occurrence by a very high risk, like we have in the Macondo, that doesn't occur every single day or even every year, but there's still a consequence to it that you got to multiply, even though the probability is low. Same thing happening in the North Sea. with the Alpha Piper when 169 people died. Simple things that happen that the probability of it occurring is very low, but the risk is very, very high. So I'm always, as an environmental person, I mean, that's my training, that's my background. I always have to weigh these the consequences, and that's why you do risk assessments. That's why you do risk assessment. You never say, well, okay, everything has to be absolutely zero. I don't think any reasonable person would take that. But nevertheless, so I still believe that it's a mistake, and to me, no data has been shown to
Justify
say
why
otherwise.
Yeah. Now, I'd like to take your attention to the issue of flaring. Are you surprised or concerned, rather, that up to this point, ExxonMobil is still flaring millions of cubic feet of gas offshore in the Stabroek Block?
Yes, even when I was an employee, I said I was concerned, and I would always be concerned, and especially when we were promised, and I think Exxon knows that it's not a good thing. All the exports, and I don't think you have to be an expert to realize that, but especially when we were promised that there will be zero flaring from day one. And day one comes, and how many days we counting now came and went, and we're still flaring, and there was production that was cut back to keep the flaring low, and I think that has changed.
That production is actually ramped up.
Right, but so I absolutely, and I think that every Guyanese, not only every guy, I think every person in the region or even in the world, because the atmosphere doesn't have boundaries. Okay, it doesn't have boundaries. I mean, you see. You have weather moving, and especially in this era of climate change, etc. So I think I think that, and that is why we were trying to correct it in the Payara.
Yeah.
So yes. I mean, to answer your question, absolutely yes, and I think that everybody should be concerned.
During your time as the head of the EPA, what were your observations about the manner in which ExxonMobil was treating with Guyana's laws and the protection of the environment?
I worked with Rod Henson, and I think Rod was a consummate professional. Rod looked after the interest of his company, and he and I, well, as a matter of fact, I don't know if you know, but Rod and I, so happened when we trace our background, we were both petroleum engineers in West Texas.
Oh.
I was working for British Petroleum, and I think he was working for Exxon. So he's been with Exxon for a long time. So we had that kind of relationship, but he was very tough, and he respected, he respected us as a regulator. He respected me. I respected him, and we used to have some tough discussions. But at the end of the day, he was always willing to accept when it's something reasonable that we were asking us. So we had a great relationship. So I would never say that that at least in Rod's time, because when I left, just about the time, and I never met the new boss of Exxon. But Rod and I had a great relationship. He always had. Look, I think the biggest issue we fought over, you know what it was? Unlimited liability coverage for a spill.
Okay.
And you talk about pushback and argument. And guess what? Eventually, Rod found a way for us, Guyana, to have the only country in the world to have unlimited liability coverage for a spill. Meaning they go and they get insurance, which is about $2.5 billion. And anything over and above that 2.5, it goes back to the parent companies. No other country has that. None. And you could imagine Rod having to go back, when he and I were getting into, we held our ground. And you could imagine Rod having to go back to his corporate and say, something, we are on the hook for this. And he but nevertheless, he realized that that it wasn't something, extraordinary. It was reasonable because, and the argument was basic. Okay, what happens if we get a devastating spill? Are you and you decide to walk away? What is going to happen to Guyana? Heck, I don't know how much Guyana could afford, but I don't think, I know that BP bill was running them like 70 billion US dollars. Guyana could afford that. What's going to happen to Guyana? What's going to happen to all the other countries in the region?
Yes,
He
and they would
understood that
require
argument. He understood that argument. However, we know that the probability of it occurring, again, the probability was very low. So the chances are, as long as Exxon did their work to protect the environment, follow laws and regulations, it should not occur. So no, I had a very good relationship with Rod, and I think Rod was very sensitive to our needs, and I think he worked very well with us.
So, how do you move from having such a relationship, and then there were, I think it was either 2 or 3 or 6 instances with the spill of hydraulic fluid, and the EPA asking ExxonMobil to pay several fines for the spill of the hydraulic fluid, but the company pushed back.
Yes.
So how do you move from a relationship where you get to have some agreement on unlimited liability coverage to not even wanting to pay a small fine?
Yeah, and so let me, because a lot of people say, well, you're going after Exxon for a little spill. It was never about the spill, and I want people to pay attention to this. We basically bent over backwards. Okay, they had 3 spills. Where are we in 2020 now? Yeah, they had 3 spills in 2019, which is spills from holes, just small spills. And they were basically not following procedures. The permit, they're required to follow there's a reason why you write procedures. Okay? If the procedures say that you got to inspect your hose, which is basically what it is, before using it, better inspect your hose. Well, so we said, okay, we're going to tighten this thing up with, rods. Well, okay, we're going to tighten, make sure that they fix the procedures and the operation. We didn't do it. We gave them a chance in 2020, 3 more spills. And we said, okay, we're going to, the maximum we could find at, $1 million, etc. But it wasn't about the spill. It was about the risk you're putting that operation at by not following procedures. The Macondo spill, the Alpha Piper spill, it was, again, procedures, not adhering to procedures. It wasn't about the spill itself. Well, now you see what the consequences were. So if you're not paying attention, and by the way, the manufacturer's direction, when you buy an appliance or something, it says, hey, these are the things that you got to do.
Yeah.
In the permit itself, it's written in that thou shalt follow the manufacturer's and all procedures. So those are basic things. If you're telling me you're not following low-risk operation stuff, you can go make the same mistake if it's a really high-risk operation, like in the Alpha Piper spill, when it was a procedure breakdown. The guy did not know that a pump was out of service. They throw the pump into service. But the procedure said what he should have done, he should have handed over to the guy who was coming in. He just put it on the guy's desk. The night shift came on, the pump, the other pump broke down. He threw the pump, the condensate pump that was out of service, into service, not realizing it was on the repairs. But the paperwork was sitting on the guy's desk, but he never paid attention to it. So it was about the procedure, that the consequences of not following procedure. So it wasn't about the spill. I know it's say, well, you should go behind Exxon. I think people lost the point here. So I want to make sure that people understand it. It wasn't about the spill. It was about that. It's a basic conduct of operations principle that you have to abide with.
Okay. Now, I know we normally focus a lot on oil and gas, but the EPA has many other sectors that it has to regulate. Another big one is the gold and diamond industry. What was the state of play when you were appointed in 2018, and you examined, made an assessment of the industry.
EPA.
And what was most startling to you?
With EPA itself.
Well, not EPA, but what you were,
Yeah. Well,
what you found in the
oh,
gold and diamond industry.
well, it's not only the gold and diamond because we had not even started to scratch the surface because of the limited resources we have. You can't remember where the gold and diamond industry is. It's way far in the out in the hinterland. So to start with, but when I arrived here in 2018, the 1st of October 2018, obviously you've got to have vehicles, you've got to have money to go out into the interior, etc. And we only had one, basically, we normally used to say 1.5 vehicles, that even that used to break down. So we never really had access. And when we started just peeling back that onion, we had over 500 permits, which really kind of shocked all of us. Even the staff who was there didn't realize it. We had over 500 permits that were out of compliance. Not only not only that, but all over the country. But it still applies. And these were permits operations that had expired some over 15 years, but they could not access those areas to start with. You didn't have any vehicles to go into the interior, so nobody was paying attention. Complaints would come in. They were operating. So you had people were operating illegally. So we decided that here, this is going to be our highest priority. Put everything down, make this our highest priority. Do you know in 2019 alone, you know how much back fees we collected? Close to $150 million. So guess what that did? It bought 10 new vehicles. 10 new vehicles. So now people are going out. We've got access. We establish a process where a permit application comes in. It's responded to immediately. As a matter of fact, we've got timelines for certain permits. Used to just come in, and it used to sit there. We had hundreds of operations who were operating without a permit because they would send in their application, and we would not respond to it for whatever reason, and they would start up their operations. And you only know that something happened when something happened. Then you say, well, okay, shucks, you didn't have. And then they would bring in their permit, and we don't even have a copy of any of this for the most part, which meant that we did not have a document control, no type of document control center. So now we fixed that. We've got an entire big area which is well managed, a high-tech document control center, which is operated by full-time staff. And now we've got, lo and behold, we've got over 2,000 permits, operations out there. But it's control everybody, the staff and they want a file, they come in, they got to check it out, they got to bring it in by a certain time. We've got a 24 hours, 7 days a week complaint hotline if you call in. And then we've got to respond within 24 hours to that person. And then we've got to give a field visit within a certain time, etc. So, we've really come a long way in terms of organizing the agency and putting the discipline in the agency. And on top of that, we're building the capacity, like getting people exposed. Besides training, we've got a study leave policy. We are sponsoring students now they can go to university, pay for that study in terms of their time and everything. But of course, they've got to sign a contract with us. We're sending people to international conferences to be exposed to the best exports and the best technology in the world. Of course, COVID got into all of this. We're buying, modern textbook. We're now members of Society of Petroleum Engineers, the Air and Waste Management Association.
Have we been able to tap into the expertise in those associations?
Oh, absolutely, and that's the whole concept. You see, that's the background that I came from, because as a matter of fact, I used to head some of these associations, the Air and Waste Management, which is the largest the oldest and largest professional environmental association in the whole world, and I was the chairman, vice chair at one time, and then chairman of the USA chapter. Um, but that's when you come to these conferences, you meet the best experts, all the experts in the world. They come, and you probably go have a beer or something with them. You build a relationship. It's free consultation. You pick up the phone. You got a problem. Pick up the phone and say, "Here, I've got a problem here. What do you think?" "Oh yes, this happened here. This is what you do." That's the kind of exposure, and that's the kind of relationship that you get. Free consultation, nothing beat that networking.
Absolutely. But if I can take you back to the mining sector.
Yes.
I know that there have been some concerns about how the operations have been leading to the pollution
Yes.
of our waterways.
Yes.
How has the EPA been able to contain that situation?
That's like I said before. That's been our biggest problem, and probably the biggest frustration and the most challenging. It's almost impossible for us to sit here, and that's one of the reasons too. By the way, another big accomplishment that everybody had to come to Georgetown. So we've established two major offices, one in Berbice, one in Linden, and then we're going to be putting one at Lethem. As a matter of fact, we should have had that office. We have the office already, but because of COVID and everything else, we haven't been able to occupy it. Mm-hmm. Have an office at Lethem, another one at Anna Regina before the end of this year, and by next year, we would have had at least one office in every single region, because it's impossible for us to be. And the other thing that we were developing was the technology, the remote sensing technology, where you can even fly drones. As a matter of fact, we have 2 drones, where you can fly drones or even use satellite imagery, where you can sit in your office and monitor operations out in the rugged country or even offshore and on these FPSOs. So this year was the budget year that we're planning, that we're all of that spending. This is my first year, as a matter of fact. 2020 was the first year of what I would call my opportunity for a real budget. Mm-hmm. And our budget was going to be more than double what it used to be to start developing these things, such as remote sensing by satellite, and that where you can sit in your office and you can monitor everything that goes on in the FPSO or in the mines. But let me tell you something. That's I saw some videos of what goes on in those rivers, and it's it really makes my stomach sick. I mean, if you look at those rivers that used to be just pristine clean, and you've got these dredges, you've got them straddled like 3 across the banks, and then they're creating these little islands, and then when they're finished, they go dredge under the banks, and even changing the direction of how the river flows, and the river, it's just milky, it's brown, it's sickening, to be honest. When I see those videos, it's gonna take a heck of a lot, but that was all part of that planning. How do we? It's almost impossible to just go and say that you're gonna clean it up. Mm-hmm. The first cleanup is to stop it. Okay, to make sure that stuff does not get into the river in the first place, which means it's through regulation and through enforcement. You have to enforce it so you can stop it, but the cleaning up it's not easy. But at least it may take, just by natural attenuation and just by natural mechanism, it probably would clean up. Who knows, decades or even longer than that. But
it would take decades to
clean
it.
Yeah, but on its own. But the first step is to stop it. And I hired, while I was there, I set up an entire unit to handle that, and hired engineers. We did not have a single engineer, by the way, in 2018. So now we've got, I think, 4 or 5 mining engine, geological engineer, people. I forgot one of the guys worked in the mines. He worked for one of the mining companies that we brought on board. Mm-hmm. So it's a good start, but we've got to, my biggest advice to to this government, which is the same advice I gave to the previous government, is that we have got to provide the resources for this agency. We are looking, oil and gas is gonna, we're looking at this economy to quadruple in the next four or so years. And if you think we're not gonna have environmental issues, you got something else coming, because the industry, all the oil industry, they're gonna be all kinds of chemicals we've never seen before, never had any experience. And this thing's gonna hit us, and guess where they all want to be located? Around the populated areas, Georgetown, on the river.
Yes.
Because the river is it's convenient, it's cheap, because you have easy access and transportation. And that's where you're gonna be vulnerable to spills and the air, we've got a major challenge. And by the way, the EPA, there was a forensic audit of the EPA in 2015. And that forensic audit, without oil and gas, without all this development that oil and gas is gonna trigger, they said in 2015, the EPA, it should have been 263 people working at the EPA in 2015. It was only like 90-something people. And
up to the time you were there?
And when I arrived, it was the same 90-something. Well, now we've brought it up, since I've been there in 2 years, we brought it up to 120. But so this year's budget was for us to go up in 2010 to, my proposal was to take it up to 200. And then the next year, take it up to 300. And even get our own laboratory. We do not have any measurement equipment. So if somebody calls and says, I've got a problem with pollutants, we have no way of going out there and measuring.
So if you don't have equipment to do something as simple as that, how is the EPA prepared for dealing with chemicals that are being brought in for the oil sector? It's a problem.
And what used to happen, and I tell you what, we have a staff that is very dedicated. They mean well, and one of the things that we were doing, we had some equipment that was outdated. They didn't calibrate it, so they were going out there taking measurements and using those. And I said, hey, absolutely not. If the equipment is that, put it aside. I prefer to tell folks we don't have equipment to take measurements. Of course, when we say that now, people laugh at us and say, well, we are not an EPA. But I prefer for us to not give them any data, because you're playing with people's lives. Because you're going to say, okay, this is safe because of the measure, but it's a wrong measurement. So I said, before we give people...
And this is measurements for?
Well, air samples, for example, and water sampling, etc. So before our equipment is not working, so we've got a list of equipment that is in the budget for us to purchase, and that was in this year's budget. So of course, but the COVID again just got into the way, and we are not able. So hopefully next year, I'm pleading with the current government. I'm making my pitch now for the EPA, for them to fund the EPA, because it's even raw, and I don't want to put him on the spot, but even Rod say, you guys are, Vince, I don't know if you know, but you are the most important agency in the land, because you look across the board at everything that you do, whether it's oil and gas, mining, road construction, you put on a hotel, everything has to pass through the EPA. And so we need the resources if we're going to be really serious of protecting people's health, safety, and the environment. Half of the population is below the age 25. What are we going to give them? They're the ones who are, who are going to have to survive this. So I'm making my play, and I'll probably continue to do it through the media such as this, to make sure that the agency, that the EPA, gets its rightful funding.
Dr. Adams, closing off tonight's program, your final thoughts on Guyana's oil industry, where it is today, and what you believe is needed for good governance.
Governance meaning of the oil industry?
Of the oil industry.
Well, monitoring, compliance, good oversight. You know, I came up with the mantra when I worked for the United States government that the government must have better equipped personnel and whatever is needed. You've got to be better equipped, which means that we make sure that we train our people. And so every time you get into negotiation, but you understand the issues better than the companies themselves. And that was one of my goals also, is to make sure in terms of training, etc. That's why I embarked on this big program, is to make sure that we on our side, meaning the representatives of the government, the engineers, the scientists, and whosoever else, project managers, we are always better than the contractor staff. And we are equipped to monitor what the contractor is doing. And not only that, we have free access to every single piece of information. There should not be anything that they have, because everything belongs to us. Not only does the oil belong to us, and they're just extracting it from us, all of the data concerning that oil, and all the studies, and all the inventions, everything that they develop, it belongs to the government of Guyana. I think any law is going to back you up on that. But we have got to train our people. We've got to get our people equipped more than anything else. And if nothing else, that would be, and as long as you do that, and of course, the challenge is the compensation. One of the things that used to happen with us, even in the United States, is that, we would train the people, we would get the best, but then they would hire them, which means we had to now compete. And it's the reality that we've got to face. You invest in your personnel, but you got to do, you've got to make sure that the working conditions, salaries, whatever is the compensation package, it has to be competitive. And that's the reality. We just can't go and train people and then they come back and allow them to just leave. That means it's like putting money on the bank, and then you just decide one day, just let it go. You've got to make sure that you keep it there until you start getting returns on your investment. It's the same thing. It's the most important thing we can have is oversight, good oversight.
Okay. Thank you very much, Dr. Adams, for being part of tonight's discussion. You've really shared some insightful perspectives. And to our listeners and viewers on Facebook Live, thank you for being part of tonight's discussion as well. And we hope that it was beneficial for you. And I do look forward to having Dr. Adams again on the program sometime soon.
Sure, anytime. I'm always available. Especially now I've got a lot of time on my hands.
Okay, Dr. Adams, thank you once again. And to our viewers and listeners, wherever you are, do have a good evening.
Thank you, Kiana.